Hey Paratopia, it's Jeff Ritzman. You hear that silence? You know what that means? There's no Jeremy Vaeni this week. That's right, Jeremy Vaeni, otherwise indisposed, out gallivanting around having a great old time while I sit here in the hatch doing the show for you. He will be dragged to the phone lines for our after chat after the interview, and a good interview it is, and one I'm sorry Jeremy missed. Our guest tonight, Dr. David Clarke. You may recognize his name as he is in conjunction with the releases of the MOD UK UFO files that are still ongoing. Let me read you his bio quickly and we'll get right into it. Dr. David Clarke is a course leader and senior lecturer in journalism at Sheffield Hallam University, South Yorkshire, UK. Prior to teaching journalism skills, he worked as a news reporter for the Sheffield Star and the Yorkshire Post, covering a wide range of general news and crime stories. Since 2008, he's been working with the National Archives as their external consultant for the ongoing release of UFO files created by Britain's Ministry of Defense. His books include The UFO Files, The Inside Story of Real-Life Sightings, The Angel of Mons, Phantom Soldiers and Ghostly Guardians, Supernatural Peak District, The UFOs That Never Were, co-authored by Jenny Randles and Andy Roberts. All of the following, by the way, co-authored by Andy Roberts. Out of the Shadows, UFOs, The Establishment and the Official Cover-Up, Flying Saucerers, The Social History of Ufology, Twilight of the Celtic Gods, and Phantoms of the Sky, UFOs, A Modern Myth. Paratopia, please help me welcome Dr. David Clarke. Dr. Clarke, thank you for coming on the show this week.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
I'm going to refer to you as David throughout the interview.
That's fine. Whatever you like.
But there you go. And I guess the first question would be, and this is kind of a cliche question, but I'm always kind of interested in this when I talk to folks like you. What first drew you into this at all? I mean, and you don't just study UFOs. You also have kind of dabbled around in ghosts and that sort of thing. I mean, what brought you to the paranormal field in general?
Well, that's a very good question, and the answer I'm going to give is that I don't know, for as long as I can remember, I've been fascinated by it. And a couple of things I would pick out is when I was very, very young, my grandparents used to tell me stories in the classic sort of from your grandmother's knee sort of thing about ghosts that used to haunt the city where I was born, sort of back in the Victorian period. And I'm sure quite a few of your listeners will have heard of a being called Spring-Heeled Jack. Does that ring any bells? That was one of the stories that was told. I mean, most people know that there was this fabulous creature that called Spring-Heeled Jack that appeared in Victorian England around the time the Duke of Wellington was Prime Minister, and he was supposed to sort of like jump from building to building, and he had glowing eyes and claws, metal claws on his hands, and he used to terrify people. Well, that was a story in London, but there were other towns and cities around England that had similar stories, and I actually heard about this from my grandparents because there was a similar scare in Sheffield, where I live, in I think it was the 1870s. It was actually before their time. It was their parents who knew about this, but they passed it on to me, and at the time I was a big, very into comics. I was reading Superman and Spider-Man and all that kind of thing, so I just thought, wow, this is fantastic, and I just carried on from there, really. So that's what got me interested in the sort of the paranormal side and the folklore side. And I would say on the subject of UFOs and flying saucers, what really got my interest and focused my interest was going to see the Steven Spielberg film Close Encounters of the Third Kind in what would it have been, 1977 or 78? I must have been around 14 years old then, and I just remember thinking, oh wow, this is fantastic. And from that point onwards, I for a few years, I just believed, like in Alice in Wonderland, 6 Impossible Things Before Breakfast, and I read all the paperbacks on UFOs that were in the bookshops at that time, and believed in the Bermuda Triangle, and believed in the mystery of Atlantis, and all those things. So That's the origins.
Right. Well, I can imagine. Well, let me ask you this: how many times did you wake Grandma and Grandpa up after they told you that story when you spent the night there?
No, I think they got very tired of me asking them the same questions.
There you go. Any in your history, any direct experience with the paranormal at all? I mean, any UFO sightings or weird synchronicities, that sort of thing? Nothing outstanding. When I was a child, the family used to go out to a place on the east coast of Yorkshire where we had a mobile home sort of thing where we'd go fishing and it was really, well, about as remote as you can get in England, which is not very remote. And I remember one night seeing a really brilliant sort of light streaking across the sky and sort of appearing and disappearing. This was before I got interested in UFOs, and I remember thinking that was something really, really weird. But I mean, at the time, I can't have been more than 9 or 10 years old. And thinking about it in retrospect, it almost certainly was some kind of aircraft or I don't know, possibly a fireball or something of that kind. Right. So that's the only thing I could say that I definitely could not identify. But I've seen lots of other things since, and particularly, I don't know whether you have the same thing in your country, but we've got this craze for people letting off what we call Chinese lanterns, which is a craze that's been imported from the Far East, and birthday parties and weddings. So they're like mini hot air balloons, and people send them up in flotillas. And particularly now at Christmas and what we call bonfire night here, on 5th of November. And on New Year's Eve, literally the sky is full of these things. Wow. and initially, when they were quite sort of nobody had seen them before, the newspapers are full of stories about, is this a flying saucer invasion fleet? And we don't see those headlines anymore. Right. Or I guess we could fast forward a little bit to when you did become somewhat interested in UFOs. I mean, in the UK, back that far, was it still the kind of thing that we face here in the States, even yet today? The stigma of ridicule and that sort of thing, was that even prevalent back when you were young in the UK?
I've never found any kind of ridicule of any kind. This is one thing that puzzles me. I hear a lot of these things about, people have had these experiences, but they don't speak about them because of the ridicule. But I've never come across any examples of this over here. Of course, there are people who think if you are interested in this subject, you're nuts or there's something not quite right about. But I've never found that at all, and I just don't. I don't think it's a factor. I think it's a factor that's overplayed by a lot of the UFO proponents as to why won't anyone take us seriously? This kind of thing. Why do people laugh at us? But I don't think you're going to change people's attitudes overnight. And I think a lot of these people who laugh, if you question them carefully about what other bizarre things that they believed in, are they religious? Right. What else do they believe in? You could probably turn it around and laugh at them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm finding these days that people seem to be a little bit more curious than the snicker factor definitely has gone down, I think, a little bit, at least to me in the past 20 years. Seems I
certainly get it as an academic. People sort of think, why are you wasting your time chasing little green men? It's career suicide. Why are you doing research on this area when you could do something where you would be taken seriously and you could make a lot of money and get a lot of prestige? You're in danger of putting yourself in a field where no one is going to take you seriously as an academic. But I just think, it's what I'm interested in, and I think it's important. And whether these things exist or not, it's an interesting human phenomenon in the same way that any other aspect of anthropology or sociology is important. So my sort of approach is to fight against this snicker factor in whatever form it takes.
Right. I think if anyone does a search on your name on the internet, one of the things that they'll come across is the psychosocial hypothesis, which is something that on this show, we've talked about, at least in my opinion, the ludicrousy of the ETH as it applies to what we refer to as the UFO enigma. and certainly when we met on UFO Updates List, we well, I don't have to go there, but I mean, we've seen the resistance to all sorts of different ideas, whatever they might be, if they're not the ETH. I mean, certainly there's a resistance to that. But the psychosocial hypothesis is not something that we've talked about on here, and seeing as you're like the one of the main people involved in that, if not the only one that I've found, can you explain to us in base terms what that hypothesis is and what the implications are?
Yeah, first of all, I'm not even quite sure it is a hypothesis. It's a whole collection of different approaches to interpreting people's experiences. And I think the base thing that I would say is people they don't really understand it, and I think the reactions that we get from a lot of the people who subscribe to the ETH suggest to me that they're very insecure about what they actually believe, and they don't like any other way of approaching the data that we're looking at. And to me, I would summarise the psychosocial hypothesis, if there is such a thing, as simply looking at the phenomenon from a human perspective. Because the way I look at it is, there is no proof, there is no evidence of any visits from extraterrestrials. Now, we could debate that all afternoon, but we would not be even discussing the subject if that evidence was here.
Right.
That would be solved. They wouldn't even be called UFOs, because we would know they would be alien spacecraft, so there would be no reason to call them UFOs.
Right. You're on the right show. So go ahead.
So I take it from that. I mean, and everybody's got a different level of at which they accept something as being real or not real. And to me, I've got a very high hurdle that I have to put the claims they have to get over that hurdle before I can accept that that something is proven. If you look at the whole subject and the evidence that's been put forward, there is nothing that's been put forward that is convincing evidence of a visit from an extraterrestrial spaceship. So, to me, I just think, what is the point then of wasting time and energy examining that aspect of it? Because there is no evidence. What we do have evidence for are literally tens of thousands of people who claim that they've had experiences, and most of them definitely have had an experience of some kind. To me, in the absence of any definitive evidence for ETs, and it's not just ETs, you can also include in that, any other kind of supernatural explanation, visitors from other dimensions or time travelers, all equally unprovable. Right. What is the common factor that lies behind all these experiences? It's the human being who has the experience. We can actually talk to these people, or some of them anyway. So to me, as somebody with a background in journalism, a background in folklore, that is the most interesting part of it. And to be absolutely honest, I don't know what the explanation. I don't know whether there are aliens that lie behind any of these experiences. And quite frankly, I don't care. There's plenty of other people who are fascinated by that aspect of it. Let them carry on. My interest is in the people themselves and the experiences, which is other people seem to find it very, very difficult to look at it from that point of view. And I find it very frustrating that we seem to be locked in this tired debate. Do these things come from outer space, or is it all a load of nonsense? And we seem to be getting more and more polarised, that there's only two possible views you can hold. Either we're being visited by aliens, or you are a skeptic/stroke debunker. There is no grey area in between. And it seems that even having a discussion, particularly on the internet and particularly on places like UFO Updates, you're forced to take one of those diametrically opposed points of view. You cannot argue a third way. There is no other way of looking at it. Either you're for us or you're against us. Either you believe in ET or you're one of these nasty, horrible debunkers who are paid by the government to say that these things don't exist. And I just opt out of that debate, because I just think this is going nowhere. You will never prove anything. You'll never learn anything taking that viewpoint. So I probably haven't explained the psychosocial hypothesis, but I've set the context for it. And I think to say what I'm trying to say about the psychosocial hypothesis, what I'm trying to say is that whatever is the source of these experiences, there's no doubt that people have what I would call extraordinary experiences. Now, the source of an extraordinary experience could simply be, a plastic bag being blown by the wind, that somebody, whilst driving a car, suddenly sees this thing waft across the windscreen, and they think, oh my God, that is a UFO. And they have had a UFO experience, even though it's been caused by a plastic bag. And to me, that is an extraordinary experience. Why did they think it was a UFO? And for that moment, before they realised that it was a plastic bag, to them it was a UFO. So they had an experience that is a genuine experience, might have been a mistake, but it was still an experience. And to me, it would be equally the same if that object that they saw whilst driving was an alien spacecraft. It's still an experience they've had. And that's the bit that I'm interested in. And what I'm interested in is the point at which something that is quite ordinary, such as a star, a bright planet, an aircraft, that in normal circumstances, if someone saw it, they would just say, oh, that's a planet, that's a bright star. But we know from literally hundreds, if not thousands, of examples that lots of times people have seen things that are quite ordinary and have interpreted them as extraordinary things due to the circumstances in which they've been seen. Because, for example, if you see a bright fireball meteor, most people would not know what that was, and they would see it fleetingly, without any warning. Suddenly this thing would just suddenly appear, zoom across the sky. They'd be absolutely stunned, and I've seen these things myself, and I know what they are, and I've been taken by surprise. Mm-hmm. You know, they are at that moment they see it before they've been and logged on or asked for an explanation from somebody. They have had a UFO experience. Yeah. That to me is the interesting bit. It's the point at which ordinary becomes extraordinary, and then when it's explained, it's back to ordinary again. That's the bit that fascinates me. That is the psychosocial hypothesis, effectively, the basis of it. It's not saying that people are liars. It's not saying that people are gullible. It's not saying that people don't know what they're seeing. It's simply looking at the experience, the human-centered part of the experience. I mean, some people are liars. There are people out there who go out and deliberately deceive people just for the fun of it, no doubt about that. But the vast majority of people, and most PSHs, I suppose you'd call them, psychosocial hypothesize, I don't know what name you'd use, would agree on that point. But we don't all hold the same views. It's a broad church.
Well, I mean, when we're talking about something like, I mean, of course, we're going to go from the standpoint, at least around here we do, that everything is about perception. I mean, I've talked about the nature of perception for a very long time in this, and back in the day, in the late 80s, early 90s, when I started talking about, I had a particular case towards the Maryland-Pennsylvania line where we had 3 witnesses to a very strange structured object. And 2 of them saw exactly the same thing, and the third saw something so completely removed and different that I could not explain that. I could not say why. All standing from relatively the same vantage point, the same front yard. It wasn't as if they were a mile apart. I mean, this is something we've talked about quite a bit on here, that whatever, if taking that there is a phenomena that is possibly external from us, it does seem to have the ability to play around with how we perceive it. Would you disagree or agree with that?
Well, I don't think there is a phenomenon, because a phenomenon implies one thing that creates UFO experiences. Mm-hmm. And I think if you look at the totality of the evidence, what there is are lots of phenomena as opposed to a phenomenon, okay. If that makes any sense. Because we know that a whole range of things create UFO experiences, from quite ordinary things, like I said, aircraft, balloons, birds, and very few of those things are linked to each other. And yet, whenever they are seen and described and then appear in newspapers and in books, they are described as UFOs, as if it's one thing that's creating those experiences. That's the way I look at it.
So
it's only through culture, it's only through the media and through the fact that ufology exists that lots of things that are unrelated, that people see in odd situations, become UFOs. And there's often this thing that's sort of like, oh yeah, but they're the things that we can explain. Once you've removed all the IFOs from the equation, we are left with something called a UFO that is one thing that's either something comes from outer space or from another dimension that is creating all the real UFO sightings. Well, that to me, it doesn't make any sense at all, because if the vast majority, i.e. 95% of the things we know we can trace to something ordinary, are being created by lots of different things, then why do we think that once we've explained those, the things that can't be identified are all being caused by one specific thing? Do you see what I mean? So I think
So what you're saying is that that remaining small percentage, that core that everyone always talks about, you're saying that essentially those are just the ones we haven't necessarily found an answer for.
Yes. And I think the ones that we haven't found an answer for, there isn't necessarily one answer for them.
I see.
Do you see what I'm getting at?
Right.
So I think that the residue isn't being caused by alien spacecraft, or isn't being caused by goblins, or isn't being caused by time travelers. I think if you looked at that residue of unexplained cases and you actually looked at and broke them down into the constituents, it would be obvious, even without doing this in any great depth, that it's not one thing that's causing those experiences. It's a whole range of things, because what you've got in there, you've got odd things seen on radar. You've got visual sightings, often of objects that are completely different. If you look at each description, there are lights, there are solid objects, there are all different shaped objects moving in lots of different bizarre ways. You've got also people who claim they've had telepathic contact with aliens, or people who think that they've been abducted, that kind of thing. So you cannot say that all those things are necessarily related. They could all be caused by lots of different things, some of which will be quite ordinary things, and I'm quite prepared to say that some of the other experiences could be quite extraordinary things that we just simply cannot explain and may never be able to explain, that aren't necessarily caused by extraterrestrials.
Right. So you don't necessarily say that there's nothing to this at all, or that everything is explainable. You're willing to accept that there's
Absolutely.
That there's something unknown about what's going on.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think you're in danger of coming over as a very arrogant person if you just say, I can explain everything, which is, I think, the problem where some of these real, debunkers who just simply say, oh, science can explain everything, and anything we can't explain, given enough time, we will be able to explain. I just think that's a very bizarre position to take, and I just think, I believe that there will always be things that we will never be able to explain, and some of them will be UFO-type experiences. I mean,
going from the whole social aspect of this, or the behavioral aspects of this, I mean, on this show at least, my co-host and I would say for at least the past X amount of months have been rather embroiled in this whole thing regarding the abduction phenomena, of which both of us are experiencers, I should say.
Mm.
However, I've long had a bad taste in my mouth over the use of regression hypnotherapy, some of the methodologies that are used in studying people who've had these experiences, so on and so forth. We went through the whole 9 yards of getting, an accredited psychologist who has written books upon the notion that there is a psychological trash can in which this regression hypnotherapy is very dangerous, is unreliable, is for lack of a better word, is really changing who people are by changing memories or confabulation of memories. This has garnered us, as you can imagine, the title of government agent, debunker, everything else.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're so dissimilar, at least in that way. I have said that the reason for that, we've both experienced the venomous nature of trying to explain this in different ways, or trying to reassess how cases are studied, how they're approached, and how they're handled. I've said essentially that it's not just when you look at abduction research and you question how reliable hypnosis is, you show what the problems are. You're not only tackling that portion of the study, but you're also kind of pulling the Jenga block out of everyone who's built upon that, who may not be involved in abduction research. Do you find that to be one of the leading reasons why there's so much resistance to all this? Is because it is really a house of cards that, don't get too close and don't pull on too many loose ends, or the whole thing comes crumbling down?
Yeah, I guess I'd say that, I don't know, I've not had a lot of involvement in the abduction side of the phenomenon, but just looking at it, again, from the point of view of a folklorist, to me, it's just, again, it's impossible to escape from this this sort of the way of interpreting these experiences that is part of the culture in which we live. We live in a space-age culture, and anybody who has a bizarre experience of missing time or, the classic sort of symptoms that are associated with abductions, and the very word abductions puts a value on what has happened to somebody. And the research that I've done and the people that I've spoken to, a lot of people aren't necessarily saying that they think they've been abducted by aliens. They have had a bizarre, extraordinary experience. And where do you go to in our modern Western society to find answers to that? If you went back hundreds and hundreds of years, you would go to someone, a priest or a shaman or something of that kind, and your experience will be explained in a completely different context, either as, you've had some kind of religious experience, or you've been taken by the fairies, or the little folk, or something of that kind. And, I just think you've got to interpret it in that broader context, that people have always had these experiences. You go back to the biblical times, that, there are people there having visions, and, Ezekiel and all that side of things. And I think people just need to take a broader perspective of it. The whole idea that these, what lies behind this are alien creatures or whatever, is a completely cultural product of the last 20, 30, 40 years. When you look at it in a broader context, you see that there's absolutely nothing new and nothing unusual about these experiences. And in the past, people could have them, and people were encouraged to have them. It's only seen as unusual now because that side of human existence and spirituality has been sidelined.
Mm. Well, when we had Jacques Vallée on the show about his book Wonders in the Sky, which is taking UFO sightings back before recorded flight, essentially. The reports that are entailed in there, that I have to say in some respects I see as less than convincing to me that they represent the UFO phenomenon. Not a lot of them, but there are a few. And one of the things that you come across in there, which Jeremy and I both found really interesting, was you'll have the sightings that are the disc, the cylinder, this sort of thing. And then you'll have these sightings of soldiers in the clouds fighting a battle. And this is seen by more than one person. That kind of thing, I question whether or not that is a yarn that's just gotten legs and has, been recorded as some kind of fact. And perhaps we're misinterpreting this, who knows. But when you're talking about the disc, the cylinder, things that are not so dissimilar to what we're seeing today, how do you kind of fit that into a misperception or an explainable phenomenon?
Well, I think possibly what's being seen there is some kind of natural or celestial phenomenon, and lots of those stories about armies fighting in the sky. I can't think of one in particular, but I've certainly read descriptions of those where they have actually been explained as celestial phenomena of one kind or another, like the aurora, displays of the aurora, for instance. So I think, again, it's a case of people interpreting things, odd things in the sky, in terms of which that particular culture in which they're living can understand. I mean, and another good example of that, more recent example, are the sightings in North America in 1896 and 1897 of the Phantom airships, and we had a similar flap of sightings in England in 1909, 1913, and very similar cylindrical objects being seen at night with searchlights, and the similar descriptions to what we get with UFOs today. But there's no, if you look at the accounts and the way the newspapers covered those sightings at the time, there was no, well, certainly not in the European ones, there was no suggestion that these things, or were extraterrestrial visitors. At the time, we were in the run-up to the First World War. We expected the Germans to be sending over airships, Zeppelin airships, to spy on the coastline and to for future bombing raids. And so people were anxious about that. They were expecting those things to happen. So when something odd was seen in the sky, they interpreted it as being, it's the Germans.
Right.
So a very similar thing is going on today, in that people, every time they switch on TV and there's a UFO documentary, or they open a newspaper and there's a story about aliens, they're out on a night, they see an odd light. Well, how do they interpret it? They're going to think, it must be one of those UFOs. So
right.
You're dragged into what culture and media are saying, and you become part of that because we can't escape it. And that has always been the background context in which people have seen and interpreted things in the sky. However far back or modern you choose your examples.
We've also had, say, Ted Phillips on the show, who's done a lot of work in the way of landing trace case stuff or physical, interactions with UFOs, and he's studied this for years and years and years, and has thousands of cases under his belt of interesting phenomena as far as effects on the ground. And at one point, I think I heard him mention, possibly on another show, that based on the reaction of the ground or the trees or the pattern of depressions in the ground, what have you, before the witness would even be able to tell him what the craft was, he already had it, pegged what it was, what they saw, roundabout. What does something like that do for you? I mean, I've personally said that, that doesn't really prove anything to me. And I know a lot of people don't understand that, but that doesn't say to me that this is extraterrestrial. It doesn't say to me anything other than this person had an unusual experience and there's an effect on the ground that may or may not be related.
I totally agree. I mean, I remember having debates with Stanton Friedman about this, and he always holds up Ted Phillips' ground traces catalogue as that's it. This is the proof.
Right.
There are solid objects coming here and leaving traces on the ground, but I agree with you. It just does not stand up to scrutiny, and it's people who draw up these vast catalogues. To me, it's like people who collect butterflies or matchboxes. And if you look at every single one of those examples in those catalogues, very, very few of them, when you actually take one of them and you put it under scrutiny, very, very few of them stand up to scrutiny. And a lot of it is just anecdotes that have been picked up, that have been lifted from UFO literature, which in the literature itself was based upon things that have never been properly investigated, that have just been sourced from, say, newspaper cuttings that may have been hoax, that may not actually have accurately described what was supposed to have gone on in the first place. So when you actually look at some of these catalogues, they don't stand up to a moment's scrutiny. And to say that, and to suggest that, some marks on the ground have been left, therefore those things are being caused by a solid flying object is nonsense. I mean, just to take one example, from a very well-known example, the Rendlesham Forest incident, for instance.
I was going to ask you about that, yeah.
Yeah, all the so-called physical evidence that was supposedly left by the UFO in the Rendlesham Forest, you can, if you take each section alone, you can demolish every single one of those things. The claim that Nick Pope constantly makes about there being higher than expected levels of radiation is complete nonsense. There was no higher than normal levels of radiation. It was completely normal, what you would expect in a pine forest.
Wow. See, that's something we always hear about.
Well, yes, but it's wrong, and this is what I don't get. These stories like that, someone, because it's Nick Pope that's saying it, therefore it must be true. Mm-hmm. But if you actually look at the evidence, you go on Ian Ridpath's website, have a look at what he says about it. Wow. There's absolutely nothing unusual about those radiation levels. And And at the end of the day, if you go to Rendlesham Forest now, it's a picnic area. There are people walking around in Rendlesham Forest. I just find it impossible to believe that if there was unusual levels of radiation there, that it would be opened by the Forestry Commission and there'd be children playing there today. It's just crazy.
Well,
if there was any kind of unusual radiation in Rendlesham Forest, you would be able to go there today with a Geiger counter and you'd be able to detect it.
Right.
Radiation does not go away.
Well, yeah. There's that, and there's the thing that I've always thought about when it comes to that is Colonel Halt's recording. I mean, how much higher does it have to be to erase a tape?
Well, yeah, I mean, but not just the radiation. If you listen to the tape, he's talking about, oh yes, we can see these trees with these unusual marks on them, and that then has been taken to mean they were caused by a UFO.
Right.
Well, the forester, Vince Thurkettle, who I know quite well, who actually lived in the forest at the time, he actually made those marks. Huh? They were marks that they made on the trees to indicate which trees were to be felled. They were the marks that Colonel Halt was examining, that Colonel Halt was thinking had been caused by a UFO.
Wow.
But how you get this over to people who are absolutely convinced that something landed there and caused those marks is very, very difficult. Once people have become entrenched in that belief, and it must be true because Nick Pope has said so, and Nick Pope works for the government. Well, interestingly, usually, if somebody works for the government, that usually is a sign that people will then say, we shouldn't trust them. Well, how is it then that Nick Pope, who used to work for the government, we can trust what he said?
Yeah.
To me, that is a complete contradiction.
Well, there's plenty of those around, right? I mean, come on. Let's talk about Bentwaters for a second. I mean, let's look at Jim Penniston, who, according to him, he laid hands on this strange object in the woods that was landed, and then it flew away. And I mean, I have to be honest with you. Rendlesham has been one of my cases where I said this is a really interesting one to me, and I've long held that thought for years. And it wasn't until recently, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because maybe I've missed something here, but I never remember, up until the 30th anniversary in this big hubbub nowadays, I never remember anything about binary numbers being transmitted to anyone.
Well, exactly.
That sort of thing. All of this stuff seems to be coming out, and so, I've had this secret frown on my face about it ever since that news came out. And I had talked to Jim about coming on the show before all of that had transpired out in the public. But there's someone who says they've laid hands on this thing, and they wrote down the symbology that was etched onto this thing. And what do you say to that?
Well, I don't want to. This is a difficult one because if he's saying that now, but at the time it happened, and within a couple of days of it happening, he was interviewed by his commanding officer Ted Conrad, and he didn't mention any of this at all.
Right.
And so this thing about him approaching it and touching this so-called object didn't emerge until years later. And his sidekick, John Burroughs, who was there standing next to him, as far as I'm aware, even to this day, he doesn't remember any of that.
Right.
He says all he saw were lights. So therefore, you were going earlier on, you referred to cases where you've got three people standing in the same position who all see something different. Uh-huh. It's a similar case. And I think what we've got here is embellishment. I think we've got someone, and Penniston's not the only one who's doing this, Halt's doing it as well. They've become so wrapped up in the story, and it's become so big that they can't lose face by thinking, perhaps it wasn't like that. Perhaps, it was just a light that we saw. I think once people get onto the lecture circuit and they're being sort of encouraged by people who have got something to make out of the subject, it's in their interest for there to be mystery. And, once you get onto this circuit where you're going from one UFO conference to another and you're meeting people who believe in the most bizarre and strange things, it's very, very easy to get sucked into that. And for the story to become more and more exciting and more sensational, because that's the way human beings behave. I mean, on the one hand, I'm saying that, but on the other hand, I do think, in fact, there's no doubt about it in my mind, that those two men had an extraordinary experience of some kind. But that doesn't mean to say that you can't have an extraordinary experience and then you can go on to embellish that story.
Right.
And it's a well-known thing that the more people tell a story, the more it improves, the more details get added to it, the more things that don't necessarily fit with it being a satisfying story for the audience get left out.
Right.
So the very fact, if you go to their original statements that they gave to Charles Holt back in, was it January 1981, they make it very clear that after seeing these lights, they then ended up seeing another flashing light, which they pursued through the forest for an extended period of time, only to realise it was a lighthouse.
Okay.
That is in their original stories. That fact has been very carefully left out of the story as they tell it now. And that is a well-known phenomenon. This is where folklore comes in that all the stories that become folk tales, like, Jack and the Beanstalk, or, all those stories that we all know from childhood, they will have begun as a story that someone has told to someone else. And the more that gets passed on, the more details of that story that don't quite make it a satisfying story are left out, and other details are added that make it more interesting, that make people remember it. And that's how things become folklore, and that's how folk tales come into existence. And if we can fast forward another 500 or 600 years' time, and you said to me, what do you think of Jim Penniston's story? It'll probably be unrecognisable to the one that you've just described.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it's a valid point. I mean, going forward a little bit, what about Colonel Halt? I mean, there's the guy who said, along with other people, there was a light in the sky that threw down pencil-like beams at their feet. Has he embellished that sort of thing, in your opinion? I mean, is that where that's coming from?
Well, to me, I always go on primary sources and primary documents, and to me, the most important primary document is the memo that he filled out that was sent to the Ministry of Defence in 1980. And if you read that, the memo is entitled Unusual Lights. The memo is not entitled Aliens Visited this airbase and shone lights onto the weapons storage area.
Right.
That, to me, says it all. And if he's now saying that, yes, this thing hovered over the weapons storage area where it's implied that there were nuclear weapons, etc., and lights were seen coming down on these things. Well, if he seriously believed that at the time, why did he not tell his superior, Colonel Conrad, and why did he not flag it up to the RAF immediately that this was a threat to a frontline NATO base, get your aircraft scrambled, there's something going on? He didn't. He went back home, he went to bed while all this was going on. You can only assume that from the tape itself. He says at the end of the tape, we're going back to the base at 3 o'clock in the morning, the lights are still in the sky. So presumably he went home, went to bed, while the aliens were shining lights on the weapons storage area. Now, to me, that just does not make any sense at all. And then, not only did he not do anything immediately afterwards, he waited 2 weeks before the British base commander came back and popped into his office and said, oh, by the way, Don, while you were away for Christmas holidays, the aliens landed. But I didn't think to tell anybody at the time.
Right.
Now,
right.
You can interpret it as, oh yeah, there's a huge cover-up going on, or you can interpret it as being that's what happened. And the British government's attitude is, if this guy, Charles Holt, seriously believed there was a threat, that something was going on that could have been a threat to the defences of the country, why did he wait 2 weeks to tell us about it?
Well, yeah, that would be the to me that's the line of demarcation right there.
Yes.
And that is it. I mean, if you're out there and you see this,
that is the crux of the matter.
Yeah.
It's pointless getting bogged down with all this stuff about, somebody said 10, 20 years later that they'd touched it and that this, that, and the other had gone on.
Right.
The most important thing is what he put in that memo to the British Ministry of Defence. And the fact is, he did not put in that memo that he'd seen an object hovering over a weapons storage area where there were nuclear weapons, shining lights onto it. He didn't put in there that, that he felt that these objects were extraterrestrial, there was no other way of explaining them, and that some action needed to be taken immediately. He waited 2 weeks to send it. That, to me, demolishes the whole story right from the very beginning, because if he thought something as serious as what is now being alleged had happened, he would not have waited that long to have taken action.
Yeah, I mean, certainly when you're standing out there and you're seeing just what you said, these things are shining lights on a nuclear facility. Really? You're going to keep your mouth shut about that?
Well, exactly.
And you don't even know what it is. I mean, that's the problem.
it's claimed that there were something like, Jim Penniston claims that there was like 80 or 100 people who witnessed this. Well, that is patent nonsense. Who are all these 80 to 100 people? The only people who are saying that are 3 people, maybe 4 or 5 at a push.
Yeah,
and Ted Conrad, who was the base commander, he was in direct radio contact with Colonel Holt whilst he was out in the forest. They were talking to each other while this was going on. Conrad was actually standing, looking in the direction that Holt was saying these things were going on, with Colonel Sawyer, both their wives, groups of other people. They couldn't see anything in the sky at all, and they had a 360-degree unrestricted vision, clear sky, and what Holt was saying he could see, they couldn't see. Right. And not only that, Holt also patched through a message to Eastern Radar, which is the RAF station that covers that area, and whilst the object supposedly was in the sky, they were looking on radar to see if they could see anything. They couldn't see anything. Huh. So how do you explain that? You've got one group of people in the woods seeing something, talking to somebody else on a radio who's looking in exactly the same direction, unrestricted field of view, clear sky. They can't see anything. Neither can anything be seen on radar. That doesn't suggest to me that what's being seen is something that is, shall we say, a physical structured craft.
Right.
Suggests to me that what's being seen is that Holt was obviously not lying. He was obviously seeing something, and the guys that were with him were seeing something. But the explanation to me is got to be that they were seeing something that they could see, but which no one else could see, which suggests to me some kind of mirage, some kind of light that, because they were standing in a certain position, I can't explain it, but they were having some kind of weird experience with a mysterious light,
right.
And a mysterious light is not an alien spacecraft. And the way that the story has been embellished is that if you read Holt's original memo, it's probably quite accurate. That's what he saw. He even called it unexplained light. He didn't call it UFOs. He didn't call it flying saucers. He didn't call it extraterrestrials. And you look at what he's saying now. He's convinced these things were under intelligent control. It was a solid object, and that the whole thing's been covered up by the governments of the UK and the USA. That, to me, is the embellishment. He obviously didn't believe that at the time. He's now saying that because he spends all his time in the company of, a lot of his time in the company of ufologists who believe that.
Right.
And if you spend time with people and you read their literature and you go to their conferences, you're going to come around to the point of view that what they're saying is true.
Right.
It's only natural that would happen.
Do you think anyone was interrogated by OSI in regards to this?
Whether I think that or not is not going to make any difference. I mean, from talking to some of the people involved and examining the chronology, I don't think so, no. Because why would OSI be interested in it? Because they would only be interested in it in terms of eliminating whether there was a threat to that base.
Right.
And basically, as far as I can see, the only investigation that was done was by Colonel Conrad, who was the second in command below Gordon Williams. And Conrad talked to Williams about it, and they just thought, there's no. If we could have, I mean, what he says is that they looked for some solid evidence, that they didn't want to put their careers on the line by basically saying, look, something's going on, but we've got no evidence for it. They sent people out into the forest to look for that evidence. Couldn't find it.
Right.
So as far as they were concerned, that was the end of it. It was just something that they wanted to forget about.
So I guess at this point I'm a double heretic because I look at Roswell as being like one of the great myth makers in all of this. I mean, and a lot of people will lambaste me for that. But would you say we're seeing exactly the same thing with Rendlesham?
Well, it's not exactly the same thing, but it's the same kind of will to believe, and I think what happens is people just selectively cherry pick the information that they like, and ignore any contradictory information. And I'm not saying that that's something that's specific to believers. There's an equal number of skeptics and debunkers who ignore evidence that is inconvenient for their argument. But again, I think the most objective way of looking at it is to try and see it from both points of view, and to try and divine what the truth is, if it's possible to do such a thing, in that massive noise. And the best way of doing that, and this is how I was trained as a journalist, is not to rely upon people's stories that are second, third, fourth hand, to go back to the original documents as far as it's possible to do so. And in the Rendlesham case, the original documents and the original testimony are Colonel Holt's memo, the statements that he took from the different airmen who were involved shortly afterwards, and there's a few bits of paper in the Ministry of Defence file on the case from that period as well, the checks that were done on radar, etc., etc. And they are the primary information. And there's only so much you can get from bits of paper, but, the earliest accounts that were given by the people who were directly involved are, you've got to interpret the paper trail in that context, and that's what I've tried to do. And I think the more you get bogged down in what people are saying now, years and years later, decades later, the less likely it is you're going to get to the truth, because I think that the longer you leave it, and the more that people tell and retell the stories, the more they go on television to talk about it, the more the story changes, and the less likely you are to actually get to the bottom of what really happened. Because I think once people have committed themselves to a story, as they have, as Colonel Holt has now, there's no way in this world that Colonel Holt is now going to turn around and say, sorry folks, I think it was the lighthouse after all.
Right.
Why would he do that? That would totally destroy any credibility that he's got.
Right.
Even if he secretly has thought, maybe it wasn't like that. Maybe, possibly it could have been the lighthouse, or at least part of it could have been. He's not going to say that, because he has now committed himself so much there is no going back. They're not going to say they were wrong, and that goes for all of them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I don't even look at that as so. I mean, of course, it's a part of how the myth gets made. It's as you say, the background noise or the noise at all over top of what could be an unusual experience.
There's so much misinformation, though. I mean,
the problem is that this field and the public in general, look at the way it operates. It always wants more, and so how long can someone hang around in this field and just say what happened to them, flatly? Like, this is it. This is all I've got. This field doesn't I don't know.
It doesn't know.
I found that out real quick, and that's something like you mentioned Stan Friedman. I mean, God bless him, but you think he's going to turn around and try and see this whole phenomenon in a different way at this point? There's no way.
No, I've got a lot of respect for Stan Friedman, actually, because he does actually say very clearly that he believes that there are extraterrestrials, that are coming here in solid structured flying craft and visiting us. And the fact that he's willing to say that quite clearly, what he believes,
right?
Fair enough. I've got no problem with that at all, and that's his interpretation. But there are a lot of people who don't say that and who hedge their bets, and who are talking about structured craft and things, but won't actually say they think that these craft are aliens.
Right. Right.
I'm not naming any names, but I think they know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what annoys me. But what frustrates me is that there are so many false trails, and there are so many myths. Myth is actually the wrong word. Falsehoods is what I mean about cases like Rendlesham. For instance, on one of the editions of that UFO Hunters program, it was claimed that the Orford Ness Lighthouse was not visible from the forest. That was said on the program, and having looked at some of the discourse that's gone on the internet as a result of that now has gone down in fact in a lot of people's minds. You can't see the lighthouse from the forest. Well, I'm sorry, you can see the lighthouse from the forest, because I've been there several times and seen it, and on occasions it's taken me by surprise. And also, it's got to be said that the light that's at the lighthouse now is it's a dimmer light to the one that was there in 1980. And also, the entire forest has changed since 1980. The whole tree line has changed. So if you go there now and maybe you can't see the lighthouse, that doesn't prove anything, because the whole geography and the landscape of the place is radically different now to what it was back in 1980. And again, it's quite clear from your own reaction when I said the information about the radiation in the forest. You've obviously read or heard somewhere that that's a definite fact. That's part of the case.
Sure.
But it doesn't stand up to a moment's scrutiny.
Yeah.
But no matter how many times I say this, people will continue to believe that the radiation is a factor, and that's mainly because Nick Pope has said so. Therefore, it must be true.
Well,
but nobody thinks to say, "Hold on a minute, how solid is that as a fact?"
Right.
You would only have to do 5 minutes googling, go on the internet and check that so-called fact, and you'd find that fact doesn't stand up to a moment's scrutiny.
Right.
But people don't want to do that because they want to believe that's the case, that's the physical evidence that backs up the story.
Well, and you've touched on the operative word there, which is belief, and that it has become the ultimate frustration for this show. Especially when it comes to the whole abduction thing. Is this you're smashing my belief system, and I've done visual data analysis in this field for going on 24 years this year, and I can't tell you how many times I've been to speak somewhere and turn around, and after you're done, of course, you get the barrage of people who come up to you after asking questions, and they've got their photographs, or they've got this or that, and what do you think of this? And I go, I kid you not, I had one in New Jersey. A man came up to me with a photograph of a disc, very elaborate. I mean, very, very elaborate lighting system. And I said, well, I can tell you what this is. He says, you can. Oh, but please give me the story. And we're standing there in the hallway, and I said, this is a prop. And I know because it's in a warehouse in Baltimore. And I've seen it. I know what this is. And so I know where you got this picture. You got this picture from Gentleman X. And he said, yeah, that's right. And he told me this was from Venus. I said, well, I hate to disappoint you. That's plexiglass, lighting truss, a thing called a jet eye. If you'd have seen this man's face, I mean, I thought he was going to cry. And he said, you've destroyed my proof. And I said, well, I'm very sorry, but wouldn't you rather know?
Yeah. Well,
and half the time, I think the answer is no.
Yeah. I mean, yes. Well, everything you said there, I can fully appreciate. I mean, it reminds me of a story that was told to me by Hilary Evans, who doesn't really have much involvement in ufology now, but he was very well known in the field over in England. Until quite recently, but he tells a very similar story about how he'd given a talk at a UFO conference, and again afterwards, and I've had the same thing. You get a big crowd of people coming up who want to tell you about their own experiences, who've got photographs, and he was saying there's one particular guy that came up and he got this photograph, and he said this is something that he'd seen and photographed, and he wanted Hillary to give him an explanation for what it was, and Hillary, having an encyclopedic knowledge of UFO photographs, immediately he looked at it and he knew it was a classic UFO photograph that had been taken in New Zealand, I think it was, in the 1950s, and it was that photograph. And this person had this photograph and was saying this was something that he'd seen and personally photographed. And so Hillary was saying, well, what was I supposed to say to him? Because I knew that he'd obviously lifted that from somewhere. And was claiming that this was his photograph. But I knew this was a photograph taken in New Zealand 30 or 40 years ago. So what is going on there? And I think what it is, it's what you find, again, this brings me again back to folklore. This is why UFOs are folklore. It's like people, when they get caught up in a legend, a story that's told that they want to believe in, people want to become part of that legend. They want to feel that they are part of it. And this goes on, I think, in abductology as well. And they either consciously or unconsciously, and I think it's unconsciously in a lot of places, they don't actually realize that what they're doing, that they write themselves into the story, because we all want to be part of that kind of human experience. And it's the wrong word to use is that they're lying, because I don't think a lot of these people are actively thinking, I am going to go out and deceive somebody. That person who came up to Hillary with the photograph, and maybe the guy that you're talking about, they probably genuinely believe that is the proof, or that they have had that experience and taken that photograph.
Right.
Yeah. It's psychology, it's sociology. It's got nothing to do with external aliens. It's a human thing that's going on.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can see that the one thing that I've thought about a whole lot is what we see with religion is like there's no part you can play in that. It's a historical thing that you either believe or you don't. And whereas something like this, even if it's ghosts, which ghost research, which has exploded in the past 5-6 years.
Yeah.
I mean, this gives people, I think, something that is inherent in what people want out of a belief system or a belief or a mystery is they want to be involved in it. So this is like, I mean, for me, I look at ufology in a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people. And I look at them and I go, you're wanting to participate in the unknown. And that's really what it comes down to.
It is.
This belief system now has been built over so many years. And like we said, to pull one card out is heresy. Now you, most recently, you're involved with the release of these MOD documents on UFOs.
That's right, yeah.
So I would be amiss if I didn't ask how a rat-fink debunker like you got that job. I mean, because this is what a lot of people are saying. I mean, I just read last night, how did this guy get in this position? He's clearly a debunker. He's clearly MI5. How did he get this job? Why isn't so-and-so doing it? The list goes on. So why don't we dispel all rumor and you tell us, how did this fall to you?
Well, if anyone wants to know how I got the job, all I would suggest to do is just go visit my website and look at the material on there. The material on my website is the product of like the last 15 years of research that I've been doing into this area I'm fascinated by official interest in this subject. And since the late 1990s, most of my academic sort of activity, my research, has gone into going to Britain's National Archives and literally spending days, if not months, just sat there working my way through all these old documents. I'd become a fixture of the place way before they decided to release these documents. I was constantly there. I'm the man who piled the pressure on, with help from a lot of colleagues, around the time that Britain adopted the Freedom of Information Act. The actual documents that are being released now include whole files on my correspondence with the Ministry of Defence, where I'm saying to them, back around 1999-2000, there's literally hundreds of pages of my correspondence with them, with me saying, I know you've got these documents. I know there is lots of demand from the public to see them. Why don't you release the whole set of files that you've got? I will help you do that. I will put some context to it. So I was approaching them back then. Far from being a member of MI5, I'm actually there to get this information out to people. I might be skeptical of it, but I feel that people have got the right to see this stuff. I mean, particularly as a British taxpayer, I've paid taxes for them to compile these files. I think, therefore, I have a right to see them. And that is one of the key things that I campaign for as a journalist. So right from the very early stages, I was working there. I was down at the National Archives. Every time a file was opened, because we've got a very archaic system over in the UK where any files or documents created by any government department, before we had freedom of information, we used to have to wait 30 years to actually see that bit of paper. So every year on the 1st of January, on New Year's Day, they would open the files from 30 years in the past. So I was one of the people who used to go down there, and I used to sit and wait for these files to be released. So, say in 2002, you would get to see the files from 1972. So that's how I got into looking at these files. I used to go down there every January, and I would go through them, and I would pick out all the UFO documents, and I would go and I would write these up and write articles on it and post them on the internet. And I would be using the information that I gathered from those files then to pile pressure on the Ministry of Defence and say, look, I know you're releasing this stuff from the 1970s, but I know you've got hundreds of files from more recent times. Don't you think, rather than hoarding them and then being accused of hiding material and sitting on material and being involved in a conspiracy, why not be totally open, put this stuff on the internet, release it, let people see it? So it took a huge amount of time, energy, and work to get that material out. And I find it very galling that, having done that, now people are turning around and suggesting that I'm involved in some kind of cover-up. Right. It couldn't be further from the truth. Right. So that's how I got involved. And the very fact that I was there, I was doing all this work, when they finally took the decision in 2007 or whenever it was, that enough is enough, it's costing so much money to respond under freedom of information to every request we're receiving on UFOs. We're just going to put all the stuff out there. The Ministry of Defence are releasing the information to the National Archives. These are two separate government agencies. So they are sort of like divesting themselves of the subject. The material is actually going to the National Archives. Now, seeing as I'm a journalist, I'm known to the National Archives. I'm constantly there working on this stuff. It's only completely natural that they would think, this is the guy we need to help us release it. This is the guy we need to sort of be our spokesperson, to be our consultant, and that's why I was chosen. MI5 doesn't come into it. It was a natural choice for them. I'm a doctor of folklore. I am a journalist. I work in writing up archive files constantly. I work there. Therefore, I'm the natural choice. There's no hidden agenda. There's no involvement by intelligence services or anything. I am simply a journalist who has piled the pressure on, got this material disclosed, and now I'm working on the dissemination and the publicity surrounding the release. That's the bottom line, basically. No big mystery. There's only people wanted to make a huge mystery out of it, and at the end of the day, who else could have done it?
Well,
who else?
No, you're right. I mean, you're right. I mean,
I was the ideal choice, and I think what's involved with a lot of the people who are making these bizarre claims is it's pure sour. It's sour grapes. It's jealousy. It's sort of, how come he's got the job and not so and so? Well, I got the job because I worked hard to get that position. You know, I put the effort in.
Well,
and anyone can sit on the internet and gripe about it, you know, but what work have they done? You know, why should they have been given the job?
Right. Well,
and I should also emphasize, I'm not being paid to do this.
Right. Right.
I have not received a single penny from anyone to do it. All I get is my basic expenses to get a train from Sheffield to London, stay in a hotel while I'm going through this stuff, and put it on the and actually go down there and do the media work when it's released. I don't get paid a wage to do it at all.
Right.
Now, I would say to anybody else out there who wants to do this, if they want to, if they want to apply to do this job, if they're prepared to take sort of, I would say, two months or out of their work schedule every year, and travel over to London and get no remuneration for doing this at all, and they're willing to do that for nothing, then please be my guest. But that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I'm doing it because I think the information is interesting information and deserves to be released to the public.
Well, let me nip something in the bud, because I can already hear what people are going to say. So let me just nip this, because this is, to me, is the important factor here. You're not getting paid a dime to do this, David, but of course he's in the media now, and so his books are going to sell more and all of that. But I would hazard to guess that the time that it's taken to pour through all this stuff, to do the legwork, to do all of the work, doesn't really hold a candle
exactly
to what that you're seeing out of it as far as notoriety, or media exposure, that sort of thing. Well, I'll put it to you this way. I would hazard a guess, probably, again, that you wouldn't be getting the accusations that you're getting as far as having the job if you were, a good little boy.
Well, exactly, yeah. If I really wanted notoriety, if I really wanted to make a lot of money out of it, I would not be saying that what I'm saying. I would not be a skeptic. You wouldn't
be giving your opinion, yeah.
No, I would be saying, yeah, there's proof in these documents that we're being visited by aliens. There's lots of evidence of that. If I wanted to get onto the lecture circuit, if I wanted to be feted at UFO conferences, if I wanted to get book contracts, I would be saying exactly the opposite of what I'm saying.
Yeah, you'd be going down in ufological history, no question about it. I mean,
well, yeah,
no
exactly. But I've got to be honest, and the evidence isn't there. And, I don't believe in making claims that don't have evidence to back them up. And anyone who thinks that doing this kind of work somehow makes a profit, that you could live on this, is deluded. That's the only way that's the only word that I can use. Yeah. If I actually went back over the last 10 years and totted up the amount of money that I'd spent on doing this research, it would be literally thousands and thousands of pounds, and the amount I've actually made in terms of book contracts and stuff like that would be a minute fraction of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, let's be honest.
So anybody who thinks there's money to be made out of skepticism is deluded.
No, I mean, let's face it. I mean, the way you make money in this is, and I've been told this from a number of people who have and myself, I've seen it on my own. You have to get the next big story.
Of course you do, yeah.
I mean, that's it. And I'll tell you what really, I'll tell you where my breaking point was, and I think where a lot of my own skepticism comes from, even about my own experiences, it is going to what was a very well-known researcher who will remain nameless because I don't need that lumped on top of me at this point. I go to his house, he shows me an amazing piece of video. Amazing. And as of yet, I'm yet to see it come out in the media. I've yet to see it on TV. This was amazing. And this is long before the advent of anyone having any sort of computer graphic imaging equipment, long before it was ever in a consumer's hands. I could not readily explain it. I looked at it for a matter of hours. And I said to him, I said, good Lord, you are calling someone about this, or you got to get this out. And he just sat back in his chair and he said, well, this is what you hold on for rainy days for. I mean, this is what you hold back. And I thought, well, there it is. See, I mean, and you say that, this is not the sort of thing someone can make a living on. Well, I beg to differ there because I think people have. I think the problem is that most of what the career people are putting out is nonsense. And you've got to continue to bring the heat if you're going to stay relevant in this. And I think the people who have brought the heat and have brought the news stories over and over and over, again, it's in their best interest to, hoaxes don't sell. What sells is, we don't know what this is. Yeah. Abject failure is success.
Yes, it is. It is in a perverse sort of way, yeah. And, I didn't get interested in this subject to make a living out of it. That was never my intention. I mean, my profession is a journalist, so why I should be embarrassed to sort of go on TV and talk about this when it's my profession as a journalist to work with the media, I find a baffling idea that people would think, why is this guy on TV? I'm on TV because I am a journalist. That's what journalists do. We work with the media. Right. Why is that so difficult to understand?
I share your frustration, believe me.
It's amusing. That's the best way to do. The best reaction is to laugh because it's the only reaction that you can have.
Let me get back to these files that are coming out. You say the evidence isn't there, but let me just ask this anyway. What to you is the most compelling file that you've seen come out that you think is interesting?
Ooh, that's a difficult one. There's lots of interesting files that have emerged. I mean, the ones that I think are the most interesting are the what remains of the very early files from the 1950s, when there were, quite frustratingly, quite a few very interesting unsolved cases of things that have been seen on radar. For instance, probably the most famous incident of all is from 1956, the Lake and Heath Bentwaters incident, which again involved RAF Bentwaters. It's one of the same bases that were involved in the Rendlesham Forest incident. There was a whole series of cases like that during the 1950s where very unusual things were seen on radar and aircraft were scrambled to go and investigate. And all we've got, because of the policy that the British military had of destroying these files every 5 years, we've only got a few little pieces of paper that have survived by accident as to what investigations were done and what conclusions were reached from that period. Because, again, another thing that came out from the last tranche of files that were released in March was that, I'm sure you remember this, there was this thing about some of the files on the Rendlesham incident having been destroyed.
Correct, yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah.
Well, there's a big hoo-ha that was made about this, as if this was something, this was the smoking gun, this proved that something was going on. But knowing as much as I know about the history of these files, there's nothing unusual in that at all, because the policy was, up until very recently, that the different branches who kept files on these things, they regarded the subject as the lowest priority of all. But basically, they saw it as a nuisance, that they thought it was a complete waste of their time and a complete waste of public money to investigate UFO sightings. So every opportunity that they had, they would destroy the files. And that's why most of the files from the 1950s and the early 1960s are gone. So a lot of the key incidents, such as the Lake and East Bentwaters case, the sightings that happened in 1952, Operation Mainbrace, there is virtually nothing in the official record about those events, simply because all the files at some point in the 1960s or 1970s were either incinerated or destroyed. And that was officially sanctioned. It was like nothing. There's been no evidence that has emerged from what from the investigations we've done that there's anything we need to worry about from a defence point of view. Therefore, why do we need to keep these mountains of paperwork that are not going to be of any interest to anybody in future? That is what they thought at that time. I mean, of course, we now know that people are fascinated. But how would you know if you were that person in 1961, say,
right,
when the subject wasn't as widely known and there wasn't as many people fascinated by UFOs as there are today? But if you were an official at the Ministry of Defence in 1960, your filing cabinet was absolutely overflowing with bits of paper about people who'd seen lights in the sky that could have been absolutely anything. You would think, why am I wasting my time with this? Let's just destroy these files and, forget about it. Nobody's going to be interested in another 20 or 30 years' time.
Right.
So people are looking at this from a modern point of view. They're not looking at it as a historian would look at it. But the reason the files were destroyed was not because there was anything to hide or that there was a cover-up going on. It was simply that they were so disinterested in the subject that they thought, why do we need to keep all this paperwork?
Right.
And bear in mind also, this is long before we had electronic storage. There was no such thing as PDFs or scanning documents.
Right, this is file cabinets, yeah.
You had a filing cabinet that was full of paper. When the filing cabinet you could no longer force folders into the filing cabinet, then you had to throw out some of the folders so you could put new ones in there.
Yeah.
And if you had a filing cabinet that was full of stuff on UFOs and there was a more important subject like nuclear bombs or troop deployments abroad, what do you think is going to get thrown? It'll be the files on UFOs.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think here's the thing. Like in the defense of people, well, I shouldn't even say in defense. I should say it seems typical to me that people would find the destruction of documents to be highly suspect because didn't we have that with Roswell a little bit? Didn't we have that with the moon landings? Yeah, whichever. So I think
for exactly the same reason, though.
Yeah, well, probably so. I don't know about the moon landings, but I mean, as far as all of that kind of stuff goes, misplaced documents or destroyed documents. I mean, this is the stuff of X-Files. This is what people. As well as I do at this point that any little thread that can be grabbed upon.
Yeah.
If it's the least bit suspect, you're a prime example. I mean. Look what they've said about you. Now take that and flip it around at destroying documents. They're going to take that and say they know something and they're keeping it from us. And that's
exactly.
This has been the whole problem with the whole exopolitical thing, which don't even get me started.
Oh yeah. But another way of looking at the destroyed documents is, we know that those documents from the early period, the 1950s, 1960s, are gone. Mm-hmm. But we do have these documents that from the late 1960s to present, which you can now go and look at the release, you can download them, you can look through them. Mm-hmm. Now imagine if it was the other way around, and that it was the early documents that had been preserved, and that those documents that we can now see and download had been destroyed. I presume you've looked through some of those files, the Ministry of Defence files.
I have some, to be honest with you. I haven't looked through a whole lot.
Well, there you go then. You've answered your own question, haven't you? Because if those documents, the ones that are now being released, had been destroyed, people would now be saying, what was in those documents? They must have destroyed them for some reason,
right.
But we know from looking at those documents now that there's nothing in there. There's no smoking gun. So therefore, if they had been destroyed, we wouldn't have lost anything in terms of knowledge, would we? You see what I mean? But people would then be saying, they must have destroyed them because there was something in those documents they wanted to hide. Mm. So you cannot win that argument. It's a circular argument. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I have to admit, when I started reading them, I didn't find anything so amazing. I mean, and unless there's, accompanying video footage I'm a visual guy, so, that's kind of my thing. There was none of that. I didn't, it was like nothing really grabbed me. And I said, well, I don't see anybody else making a big stink about this or saying that there's anything really amazing here. So am I really going to pour through all this? I got stuff to do. I mean,
but exactly. Like it's like people have decided beforehand what they expect to find in the files, and they are setting themselves up for a huge disappointment because whatever they think should be in the files, if that information isn't in the files, they will then think, oh, it's all a whitewash. The real files that prove what I believe are being hidden somewhere else. But that is, again, a circular argument. It's non-falsifiable. And, I remember one of the occasions when I went down to meet the Ministry of Defence people and when we were organising the release and preparing for the files to be released, one of the officials that I was dealing with said to me, off the record, in a coffee shop when we were talking about this, he just said, look, there is no way we can ever win in this argument. He said, if I went upstairs now into the office where all the UFO files are and I just carried them downstairs, threw them onto the floor outside, piled them up, and said, right, these are all our UFO files, take what you want, people would still say to us, but you're only releasing what you want us to see. Where are the other secret files that really have the smoking gun? And he just said, these are the files. There aren't any other files. This is all we know.
Right.
And he's either lying or he's telling the truth. And I think he's telling the truth. I've got absolutely no reason to, having spent the last 10, 15 years working through these files, if I would have, as a journalist, I'm somebody who's looking for an exclusive. I want to break the story that nobody else has got. If I'd found a single hint, a single intimation in any of the tens of thousands of documents that I'd gone through that something was going on, that something had been hidden, that somebody was trying to conceal something, I would be shouting that from the rooftops. That's what I'm looking for. That's the whole reason I got into journalism, to find that kind of information. And I can only report that I haven't found it. And the only conclusion is I haven't found it because it isn't there.
Yeah.
But that isn't an answer that most people want. People want to think, like you just said yourself, they want the mystery. They don't want people to say there is no Santa Claus.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean,
there's no money in that.
Yeah, I'll tell you my perspective on the whole thing. I mean, I dumped the whole government cover-up angle about, more than a decade ago because I just came to the conclusion that I don't think they know that much.
No, I don't.
About whatever is, anomalous about this. I think that there is an anomaly here. Okay. My problem is that everybody wants to approach this thing. The government knows and they won't tell us, so on and so forth. And I've asked people at the X conference in DC, when I went there a couple of times, I said, you're rallying for this government to tell you what it knows and to release the documents and all that. But yet on one breath, you're saying they've lied to us over and over about all sorts of different things, which I don't disagree with. But now you're going to believe them about this? Are you joking? I wouldn't believe a word that I heard about this. So, but what I
don't understand is, why do people assume that the government knows the answer? Nobody's been able to explain that to me. Why would the government know the answer to something of this kind? They don't know the answer to global warming. They don't know the answer to solving our nuclear power problems. Why would we assume that they know the answer to ufology? I just don't understand why it's assumed that the government knows everything about everything.
Well, I think when you're talking about, the stuff that Hastings brings up, when all these UFOs shutting down nuclear sites and Captain Solace, that story and. All of that's when it becomes a problem of, national security and, all of this kind of stuff that Rich Dolan has talked about. And my answer to all of that is I just don't care. If they know, okay. Am I going to believe them if they tell me? No. Do I think they know? No. To me, that's the circular argument to me. At least from my perspective, I don't care what they have to say because I wouldn't believe them anyway. But I just don't think that they know. And furthermore, I don't think they care.
No, I don't think they do. No, and certainly in this country, in England, the government we've got is incapable of doing anything in a secretive way. Everything gets out. Mm-hmm. They are incapable of keeping any secrets, and they are totally and utterly incompetent in everything that they do most of the time. So why they would, despite the fact that everything else they do is incompetent, why they would be so competent on one subject, i.e. keeping the truth about UFOs from everybody, in such a perfect, seamless way, just beggars belief. Why would they be so good at hiding that and yet so useless at hiding everything else?
Yeah.
It makes no kind of logic whatsoever. And also, when you look at it in a more global perspective, there is not a single subject that all the governments of the world agree upon.
Right. Yeah.
Why is it that one subject, i.e. UFOs, is the only thing that every government in the world has agreed to keep from the people of the world, all completely successfully for the last 60 years?
Yeah.
It just does not make any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, well, I agree with you there. I mean...
And I just don't think there's any, like you, Jeff, I don't think there's any point in wasting time arguing about the government cover-up, because you cannot win the argument. People... And if you argue against it, you become part of the cover-up, which is the situation that we probably both found ourselves in. You know, it's if you say there is no cover-up, then their reaction to that is, oh, well, you're working for government, you would say that.
Sure,
so,
sure. Yeah.
Why waste any more time?
I mean, this then goes into the realm of there's a shadow government or there's a secret space program. And do we really want to go into that circus? I think not.
No.
I mean, we've already had, a NASA guy on the show to talk about the secret space program. His verdict, there isn't one. I mean, so it all comes down to, like you said, it comes down to fantasy for a lot of this stuff. You know, we're getting towards the end here, but I did want to, my last thing for you here, which I do find really interesting, by the way. The Angel of Mons, am I saying that right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
I just want to read this little snippet here, which is off your website, I think. It says, in 1914, as German troops advanced through Belgium, they met at Mons with the British Expeditionary Force. Ill-prepared and vastly outnumbered, the British troops were forced to retreat, with little hope of saving the lives of those at the front. It was in these circumstances that many of the wounded and dying soldiers brought back from the Western Front reported having been rescued by strange angelic forms in the sky that protected them from massacre.
Mm.
So, what's that all about?
Well, this again was a very well-known and a legend that was believed by tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people across the world during the First World War. I mean, we look at it now, the story that you've just read out, people, if you read that today, you'd just think, oh, that's a quaint story. Surely nobody believed such a thing. But if you go back to 1914 and you look at the English newspapers, that story was the top story. Everybody was talking about the Angel of Mons. And it became so popular that it was almost treasonable to doubt it. You know, it was it happened to a lot of people. And we know now, I mean, it was effectively an urban legend. It had no basis in fact whatsoever. In fact, its only basis in fact was that the story originated in a piece of fiction that was written by an author called Arthur Machen, who was a writer of supernatural fiction during that period. It's very well known in his field. And he was working for a newspaper, the London Evening News, in 1914, right at the beginning of the First World War. This was a time well before the internet, and when news took a long time to reach the home front from the battlefield. And there was this first battle between the British and German troops, and it should have been a massacre. Tiny number of British troops, huge number of German troops, and they managed to sort of escape and also hold the Germans back. And this story became wrapped up with this piece of fiction that Arthur Machen had written about ghostly bowmen from the Battle of Agincourt, the medieval battle, right, appearing in front of the British troops at the moment, just when they were about to be massacred. These ghostly figures with longbows appeared and started firing arrows at the Germans. The Germans panicked and ran, and the British troops managed to save themselves. It was something he just cobbled together in during a lunchtime and published it in the newspaper. People read it in the newspaper alongside real stories about the battle and thought that this was something that had really happened. And in the process of retelling, we were talking about the Rendlesham Forest incident.
Sure.
Although it started with the bowmen, it was actually ghostly bowmen from Agincourt. They had become, after about 6 months of people telling this story and repeating it, and it being talked about in church sermons and this kind of thing, the bowmen became angels. So the bowmen of Mons became the angels of Mons, and that's how the legend was born. But the legend was created simply out of someone's imagination. And then people then came forward and said they had actually seen the angels, that they were there on the battlefield, and that there's a huge flash in the sky, and a figure like a man on a horse with a flaming sword had come out of the sky, and the Germans had scattered, and the British had been able to escape before the massacre.
So soldiers actually came back saying this. It wasn't like they came back saying, "What the hell are you talking about?" I mean,
well, sort of, yes. It was claimed that some soldiers had said this, but one of the soldiers who said he was there on the battlefield and had actually seen this actually went to and swore a legal affidavit to the effect that he had seen the Angel of Mons with his own eyes, and that Arthur Machen was a liar. He hadn't written the story, that this had actually happened in reality. This was all in the newspapers, people believed it, and then a few months later, the Justice of the Peace, who'd actually taken this guy's story down in this legal affidavit, he thought, something not quite right about this, and he went to the recruiting office of the regiment that this soldier belonged to, and he was absolutely horrified to discover that the soldier was actually in England at the time of the Battle of Mons. His regiment hadn't actually departed for France at the time. So,
amazing.
Why was he saying that? And why did he go to the extent of actually swearing on oath that he'd seen the Angels of Mons? Now people might not make the link with that legend and the stories that we've been talking about in terms of UFO sightings, but to me, there is a link. And it's the same sort of thing that you were talking about people wanting to be part of a legend. And a legend is simply a story that is told by somebody that people believe. And it's, the Angel of Mons and UFOs and aliens have got a lot of similarities. And at the same time, Arthur Machen, who was the actual originator of the story, he was saying in the Evening News, this is a story I created out of my imagination. It's not true. And various people were coming forward, including Red Cross nurses, who were treating wounded soldiers on the front, who were saying there's a government cover-up to hide the evidence of these angel sightings.
Well,
and that when the war is over, Mr. Machen will have to eat his words, because we've treated soldiers who've actually seen the aliens, and I'm getting angels and aliens mixed up. So do you see what I mean? Allegations that there was a government cover-up were going on then, and people were saying that, they were covering up these stories about angels.
Yeah. And why? I mean, why would you do that?
Well, yeah, all it suggests to me is exactly the same sort of thing is going on both today with the UFO stories and in the past with these stories from folklore.
Yeah.
Which explains why I was so fascinated by the Angel of Mons and ended up writing a book on the subject.
Well, and speaking of, before I let you go, would you consider coming back on the show at some point, and maybe we talk a little bit more about the folklore?
Yeah,
how it applies to all of this. I mean, certainly, Jacques Vallée's name came up today, and it would come up again. I'd like to kind of go a little bit back and forth with you about his stuff and Passport to Mangoni and all of that. But
I should add at this point, when you asked me right at the beginning, how did I get involved? Mm-hmm. And I was saying about some of the books I read at the time. Well, the books that really influenced me were Jacques Vallée, and more than Jacques Vallée, I would say the person that really got me interested in the subject was John Keel. Yeah. I was absolutely obsessed with John Keel's writings and corresponded with him as well at one time. And he was one of the biggest influences. The Mothman prophecies and Operation Trojan Horse. That was the sort of UFO material that I was reading when I was a teenager.
And here you are today.
Yes, you never escape from this subject, I find.
You're not telling me anything. You're not telling me anything I don't know there.
You're trapped for life once you get involved in ufology.
God, don't say for life, please. At some time, I got to get out of this. Why don't you tell folks where they can find you on the net, where they can get your writings and read your further reports on the MOD docs?
The best place to go is I've had various websites over the years, but the one I've settled on now is simply www.drdavidclarke.co.uk. That's my webpage, and you'll see that if you go there, it's subtitled Folklore and Journalism, and there are lots of links, and there's lots of my work that I've uploaded onto the website, and there are some direct links that will take you to the National Archives UFO page, which is where all the Ministry of Defence documents are being uploaded. And people will be aware that this is not all happening at once. The files are being transferred in small collections. And I think that the process of disclosure will end sometime next year. So I think there'll only be another 2 releases of documents, and then the entire process will come to an end.
Oh, okay. Well,
so maybe that will be the time to have another chat.
Absolutely. And I can tell folks that your website link will be on our homepage as you listen, so you can check that out there. And check his site out, because he's got some rather interesting writings and communications with people involved in the Rendlesham incident that I think people in this audience will find really interesting. So do check that out. David, thanks very much for being on the show. I mean, we definitely don't agree on everything, but
well, it would be surprising if we did, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, I give you all credit for the work you've done. Thank you for pressing to get these documents out and towing the line for that. And I don't think that you've been properly thanked for that, but certainly thank you for that. And we definitely hope to have you back on the show very soon and talk with you some more. So, Dr. David Clarke, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And Paratopia will be right back after this.
If you record audio for any purpose, chances are you want it to be heard. You want to attract the largest audience possible who can hear your message. That's where we come in. We're cyberears.com, a revolutionary internet service that will host your audio files and help you promote and track its popularity. Considering hosting a podcast to the world? We have all the automated tools to make the process as simple and easy as it can be. No technical mumbo-jumbo to work out. CyberEars.com does all the work for you. You record it, we take care of the rest. So don't delay. Go to CyberEars.com today and register for a free trial account. Upload your audio files and get heard. With CyberEars.com, it's your audio on your terms.
So the Jer.
So the Jeff.
Ha 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 ha.
Reversal of fortune.
Yay. Jeremy joins us, Paratopia.
Oh my goodness, Jeff! I have to apologize to you. You've been a trooper in all of my shenanigans. I've been a little off my game this week, folks. I've been traveling, and my schedule seems to change by the minute.
Yes. Is there a woman, Jeremy? Is that what's going on?
Well, there might be a woman involved. You know, it always seems to work that way.
That's right. So, how are you? What's going on?
I'm doing rather well. I'm just touring the country. I saw Tim Banal of Banal of America.
Excellent.
About a week ago.
Hello,
a fine
Tim.
host.
Yeah.
Yes. Hello, Tim. But more importantly, no offense, Tim, I had a meeting with Philippe Mora today about the future of our movie project, and it's over. Wait, no. And so it looks like Jeff and I haven't even talked about this yet, but he's going to be back in town in about a month. So we're going to start filming. I'd rather be vague about what we're going to do on air, because I'd hate for someone to steal it.
Right.
But basically, we'll start filming in a month, and it will be mostly your idea, Jeff. Yeah, so that'll be in a month. We'll start shooting that. Oh, and so in, I think, November, he starts shooting the Dolly 3D movie.
Excellent.
And Alan Cumming will be playing Dolly.
Oh, excellent.
That's right. Formerly known as Nightcrawler from the X-Men.
Right. What a role reversal there. So anyway, you missed a good interview, man.
Yeah, I hear. So this interview turned you around on the Rendlesham Forest case. Is that correct?
Well, it's definitely given me doubts. I mean, whereas I had some doubts before, but only recent doubts. I'll put it to you that way. I mean, for a long while, I've thought, that's a pretty solid case. I thought that was actually really, really well documented and a pretty, and the people seem very, stand up. It's not like these are flaky people. I mean, I have to admit, ever since the 30th anniversary came around, and the big speaking engagements and all that, and then Jim Peniston, who we were going to have on the show at one point, we were talking to him about it. Came forth with the whole binary code thing, and I don't know. Like as I said to Dr. Clarke tonight, it's it's just one of those things where I kind of went, what? I mean, what? And so, he filled us all in on, some other things that don't exactly fit the puzzle. Now, that doesn't say, and he even said this, that doesn't say that these men didn't have a very strange experience, but the question is, what was it? So I think he was a good guest in that there's a lot of skepticism in the way that we have skepticism about some of these cases and some of the stuff surrounding ufology in general. I mean, we have a lot of skepticism on this show about that. What it is, how it works, all of that. And we didn't get too deep into a lot of things. This was more an introductory issue for him, and that was good. But, he is very skeptical, and we certainly don't agree on everything. I don't agree with everything that he said tonight, but we're going to have him back, and we're going to go into a little bit more depth, especially with him being a folklorist. I think it'd be an interesting show to do.
Do Peniston and the others have an answer to that?
Not so far as I've heard. I mean, this was kind of a new discussion for me when I discovered yesterday that he was very into discussing Rendlesham and all of that. That's something I wanted to bring up. So, I don't know that there's been any response to it now.
All right. Well, in other news, you and I have experienced separate but equal, odd sort of poltergeisty phenomena.
Yeah.
Why don't you let everyone know yours? Because I find it funny. I find it funny that you're now attacking this with a curmudgeonly attitude.
Oh, it pissed me off. In this very room, the media room, the guitar room, whatever you want to call it, I've got a shelving system on one side of the room that is filled with nothing but, film props and figures from Halo and Star Wars stuff, Indiana Jones stuff. It's all over the wall. I mean, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 shelves there, and the middle section is made up of 3 very large shelves. I'm laying in here. My wife was reading, so I came in to watch a movie. I was laying down on the floor. I'd say I watched the majority of the movie, and not a word out of the house. I paused the movie. I got up, went to the bathroom, came back, sat down. Probably another 20 minutes to a half an hour later, there was this crash. I see something beforehand. I'm watching the TV. The shelves are to my left, and I see a dark shape. I almost thought it was my wife coming in, telling me, "You going to bed? What's going on?" Because it was really late at that point. And but I instinctively knew it wasn't a person. I said, I'm not looking at it. I'm watching my goddamn movie. That's it. So I laid there, I watched the movie, and no sooner did I think I'm watching the movie, crash, everything off the third shelf, which is the top shelf, comes wailing down into the floor. Everything. This was not the kind of layout on the shelf that if one figure fell, they would all domino off the shelf. That wasn't how it worked. But it was literally, the shelf was clean. And everything had fallen down on top of my guitar processor, my amps, my pedal board, everything. So, a hell of a noise. And I looked over. It did startle me. I'm not going to lie about that. It startled the hell out of me. And I kind of sat up off the floor. And then I just got pissed off. And I was like, can I even watch a fucking movie? And about that time I got up, it hit me. What time? And I looked over at what time it was. It was 3:01 on the dot via the Mac. And about that time, as I started picking things up, I have no other way to explain it other than the general air of the room. I interpreted this feeling that I got, which was goose flesh, which even started just before I saw the black mass up near the ceiling. I don't know, this feeling as if, I only get the run of the house at certain times of the day and you should be in bed. That sort of feeling. That's at least how I interpreted it. And so that was it. I picked up my stuff. I finished watching the movie and I went to bed. I do have to say that even after everything had fallen on the floor and I had gotten pissed off and yelled, as I looked up in that area, there was a kind of a weird, mirage-y, I don't know, just strange look about this spot in the air right above this shelf, or right around this shelf. And so I really didn't, I really didn't.
You said it was like a white fog, right?
It was kind of, shimmery is not the right word for it. It's slightly, I don't even want to say the static. We talk about that staticky look. It was kind of like that, but it was, I don't know, it had a haze to it. And it did seem to be like an active vibration to it. But I really don't know how to describe it accurately other than to say kind of mirage-ish looking. And then, it wasn't, a few nights later, I'm sitting here at the computer. I'm checking my email before I go off to bed. And I've got a display cabinet in the right-hand side of the room, which is to my left at this point. And in there is all of my Iron Maiden stuff, all of it. And tickets and belt buckles and figures and all kinds of stuff is in there. Records are in there. And in there I've got a big, 20-inch, Somewhere in Time Cyborg Eddie. He's all the way against the back of the cabinet. And he doesn't stand up. You lock his feet in place, but he's so heavy that he won't stand upright on a shelf in there. So I lean him against the back of the shelf. And he's very stable. I had little pieces of two-sided tape basically sticking his feet to the glass. I'm sitting here, and I hear a commotion over in the corner. And the first thing I yell is Indy, my dog. Because I'm thinking, what is she digging at over there? Because that's what it sounded like. And I look over, and everything that's in front of Eddie is now pushed to the back of the closet, and Big Eddie is now slammed up against the glass on the front door of the display cabinet. And he's jostling for about a second as I look over, and then he falls backwards. So it's almost like something drove him through the stuff in front of him, up against the glass, and then let him go backwards. And again, I got pissed off. I said, you break my shit, and I'll get somebody in here to get you out. And that was it. That was the last thing. There was no visual for that at all, other than seeing him pushed up against the glass, which could not and should not have been happening. So clearly, whenever I stay up quite late, this is about the same time as well, around 2:30, 3 o'clock. Clearly, there's a problem. That's what I got, and both of those things, to me, there's no way that anyone is ever going to tell me ever again it's my imagination or the heat in the room. I don't know, loosening action figures joints. Forget it. That was so blatant and so obvious. No one is ever going to tell me again that there's not something in this house.
I'm trying to make sense of it. I guess my thing was weird. I'm in a bed, not of my own house, and I turn toward the window. I roll over onto my right side to go to sleep, and I shut my eyes, and there's the window that I'm looking at. Huh. But in my mind's eye, except almost like an ethereal version, almost like you would expect a ghost would look at the window and see this version of it.
Huh.
So I see this with my eyes closed, and again, it's just like I'm looking at the window, except I don't even know how to say it. It's almost like when we would talk about, you shut your eyes and you see everything in red.
Yeah.
Like you're still seeing the room, but it's sort of in a murky red. It wasn't that, but it was like that. It was more detailed than that. Mm. It was like a Freddy Krueger version of reality or something. It was weird. And I'm awake. I wasn't asleep. I just rolled over to, go to sleep. And so there are two windows, and the one in front of me is still the window. The one down by the foot of the bed is almost like a doorway, and I can see a stairway behind it. It almost looks like a church or a rectory or something. And this old man peers around the corner at me just an old dude with white hair, a short, like a round head with wispy white hair, like thinning white hair.
Huh.
And he's smiling, but I get this evil feeling from him, like something really bad. And I don't know. I just have a feeling of people in the place, and I'm thinking, oh, please, not an abduction, not something not now, not here. Please, no. And as far as I know, nothing happened. Mm-hmm. You know, I sort of just opened my eyes and I was like, I'm not dealing with this. And I got up. I decided to get up and walk around and just check out the place, and nothing seemed to be. I mean, this was after a while. I got up and walked around and checked out the place because for a little while I was just sort of lying there scared, like I don't really want to turn around and see something. Right. But I did. I turned around and I looked in the doorway. Nothing was there. So I don't know what to make of that, except cut to, the next day telling the person who lives here, and she says that somebody had one day walked home with her. Like a ghost. Really? that she and her friend who actually owns the place were walking down the street, and they both felt it, but she saw this guy, and she said it kind of fits the description, except that he was wearing a hat. No shit. Yeah, and that, he sort of lives in the basement, and one time he tried to come up into the apartment, and she yelled at him not to come into the apartment. It's like, this is my place, go fucking stay where you're going to stay. So was it that? I mean, I don't know, but interesting, Yeah. And when I told her about it, they saged the place, her and her friend. They have this, a CD that has some sort of Native American chanting or something on it, and sage and the whole deal, and they hopefully got rid of whatever this is. Huh. Yeah. So I don't know what to make of that, but it was interesting. Yeah. Curious. And I don't know. It's just funny because here it is. What you get is the more you give, the more you get, or whatever. Right, I mean, It's like we've been talking about demons, and I had the sense of a demon when I was in Niagara. I talked about that, right? Yeah. When we were in Niagara, and I had this this nightmare that would have just seemed like a nightmare, except that my meditation energy was clearly active, and when I was pulsating between my hands and my chest, and when I pulled my hands away from my chest, I felt this energy recede back down and into me. And the nightmare was definitely about a demon. Huh. And it was one of those really lucid, just awful, like you have to get up and walk around nightmares. So in my head, I'm thinking, I'd said, I'm going to release this new book, and once I do, then what am I going to do? Am I going to go become something else or whatever? And so in my little beady head, where I'm a narcissist and the world revolves around me, I'm thinking, like, there's something watching me, waiting to see what my decision is, or waiting to see what I'm going to do next, Like, that's kind of the feeling I get, but that could just be my own feeling, and especially if what I experience here is, some dude who lives in the basement now. Yeah, that's weird. So I don't know what to make of any of that, but there it is. Do with it what you will. Yeah. There it is. And, it's interesting. I just wanted to comment on demons for a second, because there's been some chatter from Brad, especially on our message board, about, talking about the jinn. Why is it okay to say jinn or interdimensional, invisible people, but not angels and demons? Uh-huh. And why do we have such a problem with angels and demons? And we come up against this every now and then, right? But to me, follow me on. Tell me if you follow this, Jeff, or if you find this to be true. It's like angels and demons we don't know what that means. The sort of shallow end of it is, the devil on one shoulder, the angel on the other, or, playing a harp or whatever. Then there's the Christian version of, like, this sort of sky war going on, right. Between God and the devil. And then there's also whatever the hell Milton added. It's like you've got, like, the Middle Age version of demons, and then the the levels of hell that fiction authors added in. So it's hard to say, like, what is our picture of a demon? What is demonology at that point? It's a mixture of fiction. It's a mixture of religious, and it's kind of another catch-all that just doesn't do anything for me, and smacks of Christianity. Uh-huh. Because I think it's kind of hard to separate that out when a Christian says, well, why don't you consider demonology? It's like, well, I would consider demonology, but not the Christian version. Like, that doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, because I think that's what they mean. Yeah. But I don't know that I buy that. I mean, because there are so many, I don't know. We would just have to look at, like, different systems. I mean, Buddhist demon.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a dog that keeps handing me toys. It really wants to play with me. We would have to consider, Buddhist demonology. What do the Hindus say? Because there are these sort of like fleshed out, it seems, characters that we find in all of these different religions. And the least fleshed out, it seems to me, is Christianity. It's like you've got this Satan character, right? And you've got a couple of peripheral characters that are talked about a little bit here and there. But there's no like real demon world that's fleshed out in the same way that you get with some of these other traditions. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it's worth looking into on that grander scale in the same way that the jinn are worth looking into. But ultimately, at the end of the day, like you say, even the jinn is just another sort of placeholder for we don't know.
Yeah, it's just another envelope. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can always regulate all of it to some sort of negative.
I mean, why would we do that? Like, why do we care? Why care about like which placeholder we use? Whether you say demon, jinn, alien, trickster.
Well, because they're poisoned words. I mean, they all attach some sort of peripheral meaning to them. That's why. I mean, they've all got their own trappings of what they're, ball and chain to. And, and some people have a problem with angel or demon or whatever.
It came up because Phil Imbrogno, it seems, is like, well, I wouldn't believe in angels and demons, but now here's my story of the jinn. Right. And I get what they're saying. It's like why believe in one and then poo-poo the other when both are equally inconceivable? Mm-hmm. Except that the jinn, again, I guess it goes back to me. It's like the jinn, like Buddhist demonology, has a fleshed out story to it. There's a backstory there. There are these invisible people, and it seems like there's a story anyway, whereas Christian demonology is just like, there are these demons, see, and they're evil, and they'll do anything to trick you.
Right.
And it's like, well, what does that mean? Where do they live? What are they doing right now?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, there has to be some sort of mythology or some sort of backstory to them for me to even consider them. It can't just be a placeholder for a placeholder, which is evil, Right. We don't know what evil is, so we say demon. It's like, well, all right, that does nothing for me. Jinn does a little bit more for me because, again, there's some sort of thing there. So, but it doesn't do a hell of a lot more for me.
Well, I mean,
it just seems more plausible. The Imbrogno version seems more plausible. It's like, well, you've got these jinn, see, and they would say that they're jinn. I would say that they're interdimensional beings.
Right.
But you can't really say that with Christian demonology because there's no beings there to speak of. It's just a placeholder for evil and why evil happens. It's not a placeholder for the shenanigans of a seemingly other intelligence interacting with us that we might be able to explain through new physics. You know what I mean? Like, there's a difference there to me.
You think you'd be able to explain jinn through that?
Yeah, I think you could explain jinn through that. Now, whether that means that it's true or not is a whole other question,
Yeah.
I mean, so what if you can explain jinn through that? You can only explain jinn through that because, again, it's a fleshed out mythology. Invisible people who kind of come here now and then who hate us because, we took over the earth when they left and God said, you've got to, help us.
Well, I mean,
blah, blah, blah.
I'll put it to you this way. I've seen less of the of that material than I have, the fleshed out notion of what a demon is and what fallen angels are and all of that. And I mean,
then maybe I just don't know. Then maybe that's my own. Then I just don't know. Like, where would I go to find fleshed out Christian demonology or whatever? What a demon is, where it comes from.
Well, I mean, the whole biblical thing. If that holds sway at all. I mean, there's.
Yeah, but the biblical thing. I mean, am I wrong in thinking that there's not a lot in there?
I mean,
they don't really talk about. It's just like fallen angel has an army.
Yeah, well, I mean,
does that
would have to go into Dead Sea Scrolls and that translation. Everything is translation. This is the problem I have with all of this old ancient stuff. I mean, it's the jinn. Yeah, we've got this fleshed out thing, but where does that fleshed out thing come from? And how was that interpreted? And could it have been misinterpreted? And there's no origin for it. I mean, it's like I said, it's another envelope that we can say, oh, we can call it this. Well, that's great, but where's the origin of this come from? Where's the original report, as Dr. Clarke would say? I mean, that's the problem to me. And the same goes for demons. I mean, we could You can talk about the archangel Lucifer and, being envious of the Godhead and trying to take over a war in heaven. They're cast out. Now they exist, in hell, whatever that means. The only thing that the jinn have on that is they're in this parallel dimension or so we've been informed of. Is that an accurate
But even Buddhists,
even
Buddhists have levels of hell, I think, like 7 levels of hell.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's, already, like, you can go into that and you can look at, okay, what makes up these different levels? And they have it all mapped out. This is what they are. Is there anything like that in Christianity where it's like, well, what's hell? Well, hell is whatever Milton added.
Right. Yeah, I have no
it's
idea.
fire and brimstone. Yeah, it's this fictionalized thing that was added much, much later by a fiction writer that heavily influenced how we think about it.
Yeah.
So to me, it's there's a world of difference there. Now, whether either of them represent reality,
it's a whole other deal. Yeah.
Can you know?
Yeah, that's true.
I don't know.
That's for an upcoming show.
I don't know. I just don't. I guess I just don't see a reason to get up in arms over or concerned about. Whether someone says, "Well, I don't believe in demons, but I'll believe in jinn." Jinn makes more sense. I mean, neither of them make sense. At the end of the day.
Yeah, that's kind of the point. Yeah. Well, Jeremy, we are out of time.
Well, Jeff, it was a good show for me this week.
It certainly was. You didn't do anything. Okay, Jer, so that's it for this week.
All righty. Sorry again, everybody, that it was a day late. Hopefully it was not $1 short.
Definitely not.
And thank you, Jeff Ritzman, for picking up my slack.
Certainly. And we will see everybody next week.
Out!